Hi, my name is Megan Gidley and I'm the Director of Marketing with Connect. Welcome back to the Get Connected podcast. We're in Acton, California with Johnny Flores, and today we're going to be diving into the bridle horse tradition, specifically with the bridle. Let's dive in. Johnny, welcome back. I can't wait to talk about today's topic, which is going to be the bridle. Can you explain what the bridle is and what it does for a horse?
Yeah, so in the old school vaquero tradition, like if you really trace it back, there's an idea that all those vaqueros rode in spade bits with big old tall bits, fancy ornate shanks, and their horses were amazing. But saying that is like saying that all the Western riders in reining are the same level as like Andrea Fappani's $7 million reiner. That's a ridiculous statement. The fact is there were levels to it, as with everything, right? So the bridle, it kind of has two ideas. There's a little bit more of a charro idea and a little bit more of a vaquero idea. That's as the times went on and the westward expansion, all that kind of fueled things. But the bridle basically is it's the leverage bit, so to speak. If you look at it, it looks like a leverage bit, and it's hung on the horse, and generally it has rollers. Ideally, it has a larger port for the horse to really hold it, and it's usually used with a leather curb strap. In the charro tradition, they use a curb chain. And there's kind of a distinction between bridle bits and the bits nowadays, where you see the fancy ornate shanks. The shank design is the same, but the ports are really little in a lot of the modern bits, and those are more leverage bits, where you pull and you're exerting leverage on the chin, multiplying by 2, 3, sometimes 4 times your pressure. You pull 2 pounds, they'll feel 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. But the vaquero bits, below the cannon bar, which is actual mouthpiece, below that measurement, let's say it was 4 inches, the actual port would be 4 inches tall. So in theory, there was no leverage. I know it's probably more complicated than that, and I've spoken with engineers that speak a whole different language, so I'm not going to pretend like that's a fact. But the idea is to give the horse a lot to really protect itself and to work off signals. And much like with a hackamore, how it's not like, do this, damn it, it's a little bit more like, hey, can you do this real quick for me? The bridle should work in that fashion. It shouldn't work by yanking super hard. I think we talked about that Horseman's Mission. Someone was talking about how they used tail hair on the bridle reins,
Yeah.
And if it broke, that was a test that your horse should not be in a bridle. So that's just a testament to how light they should be by the time they're in the bridle. And the charro tradition is a little bit of a precursor to the vaquero tradition. They use smaller mouthpieces, and they're a little bit more in line with the leverage bit, at least if you look at it kind of analytically. But their horses are so similar to vaquero horses, you wouldn't really know the difference.
So when you're starting to use the bridle, you should be able to gently guide and not have to force the horse before you begin using it?
Yeah, like if you're really trying to adhere to the tradition and the idea of it, the idea is to train fully in the hackamore. Train like as much as you possibly can, to the point where that horse is pretty much finished. And then the two rein is just a transfer of information via proxy, right? You pull with let's say 70% on the mecates, 30% on the bridle. Your horse is going to learn how to back up off super loose reins, off super light reins. So the whole idea is to not ever force the horse to learn with the bridle, at least if you're adhering to the tradition. Sometimes, now again, you got to get a horse disciplined, and that's okay. And maybe you do have to bump on the bridle. But generally speaking, you're trying to be as light as possible and really guide them through it. Keeping in line with everything. We're trying to guide the horse. We're not trying to like force and dictate to the horse what they're doing. We're trying to meet them in the middle and ask them.
That makes sense. So is there a specific way that you should use the bridle or equip the horse with the bridle?
Yeah, so I think the second part of your question is the easier one to answer. Equipping your horse with the bridle, there are so many different mouthpieces now. Back in the old days, in the vaquero tradition, iron was expensive, it was hard to get. Many of those people rode around in simple bits, or they didn't ride around in a bit at all. They rode around in their hackamores. So, trying to find a bit now is so freaking easy. You can find dozens and dozens of mouthpieces. And I think that people should go to a trainer and say, hey, I want to try bits, and try to figure out a bit that works. Some horses might like a taller bit. Some horses, like my brother's horse, my brother's old Mustang, she has a really little mouth, so she couldn't handle anything above 2 inches. And a spade is like 3 to 5 inches. So it's like, that's never going to work for her. And then my horse, she does great in a spade, but you put a leverage bit on her and she immediately gapes her mouth. So you got to kind of find something that works for the horse and is comfortable for them as an individual. And there's a lot of science for mouth conformation too, and trying to find a bit to like fit your horse, but that's kind of like a lost science. So good luck finding that, to be quite honest with you. And could you remind me of the beginning part of your question?
Yeah, is there a specific way that you should use the bridle?
Yes. Ideally, if you're using the bridle and you've gone through all your steps and you're trying to adhere to the tradition, it should be one-handed. You're not really square reining. You're not really picking at the rein, because if you do that, you know how like they say if you're like an inch off on a flight takeoff from like New York to LA, you'll end up in like Washington, right? That whole thing. Like if you pull just a tiny bit tighter with one rein, you'll move the top of that spade and you could risk hitting the teeth, you could risk cutting against the gums. You ever chew on a Dorito the wrong way and you're like, ow, right? That's what could happen. So we want to try to pick up more upwards and stay within our little box, the pommel, the fork of the saddle. You want to stay within that little square foot area. So you want to try to be very centered. You don't want to force your horse into the two rein where they still need lateral help with both your hands, because then you'll be pulling around and you will very, very easily make your horse's mouth bleed. Or at the very least, if you have a smaller bit, they're riding around in training wheels and you're pretending that they're riding around in a bicycle. You're not really training. You're just sort of like, hey, look at me, I'm doing it. That's all pretend.
Right. That makes sense. Are there any brands or styles of bridles that you recommend, and does this recommendation change depending on the horse's experience level, or the trainer's experience with this specific piece of equipment?
Yeah, so as far as like brands I recommend, there are so many good bits. I've had old bits made by Dorman, which was an old company that I believe got sold to Rinaldi, but like old antique bits that, by today's standards aren't exactly pretty and aren't exactly like well made and all that, but it's like, I think a lot of people will get into buying a fancy stainless bit, not realizing that stainless sits in their mouth. It produces no saliva, so you're working off a dry mouth. Dry mouth is a hard mouth. You want to lubricate their mouth, so you use things like sweet iron. So a lot of the bits made in Mexico, a lot of the bridle bits that you'll find from companies like Old Spanish Trading Company, they make wonderful, wonderful bits, great service, and they always make your horse really slobber up because they rust slowly. But I wouldn't tell someone to just like go and suddenly get a bridle bit. Sit around, play with it. Play with simple curve bits, play with Tom Baldings, play with Slicers, play with all these different bits and find something that works for your horse before you try to invest in something custom. Because you want to make that purchase and know that it works, not an impulse buy. And I can speak from experience. It sucks to make the impulse buy.
Take your time with it.
Yeah, take your time with it.
Is there anything else about the bridle that you think viewers should know before we give them a tutorial on the next episode?
Yeah, so with the bridle, there's kind of two main schools of thought, right? There's the old school thought and there's a new school thought. The old school thought more closely adheres to those who use spade bridles, bridles above 2 inches that'll hit the palate of the horse's mouth. If you're using a bridle that's with the port shorter than 2 inches, you shouldn't, but you can use 2 hands to school your horse. You see reiners do it all the time. They walk in, they put 2 hands on the reins, they school their horse through the maneuvers. And it's not a bad thing, but I just want to make it clear that when I speak in a very traditional format, I'm speaking on bits that touch the palate. I'm not speaking so much on bits that are below that, because when they're below it, you can use 2 hands to train and really school.
That's great information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Get Connected podcast.
Don't move. Get up. Get up, you're fine.
Her face is bright red. She started panicking.
I panicked. I literally thought I was about to die.
Thanks for watching another Get Connected podcast. Make sure you stay tuned to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel because we are far from done. Have a great week.